Imagine living in a time without electricity, central government, or modern medicine. That was the reality for most people in the Middle Ages or the medieval period. Life was brutal and unpredictable. People faced constant fear of invasion, starvation, and disease. Amidst this chaos, there was one towering institution that offered structure, hope, and authority: the Catholic Church. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed, Europe fractured into a confusing quilt of small warring kingdoms. There was no single unifying country. The Church stepped into this power vacuum. Because it had an organized structure that stretched from Italy to England, the Church became the only true European force. It provided a sense of shared identity and purpose that went beyond any political border. A core of the Church's power rested on its spiritual authority. The Church taught that life on earth was temporary, but the soul's fate was eternal. Crucially, they taught that the only path to salvation, to reaching heaven, was through the Church itself. This belief gave the clergy immense control. If you challenged the Church, you risked your soul's eternity, a fear that was more powerful than any king's army. This spiritual power was administered through 7 sacred rituals known as the sacraments. Think of the sacraments as necessary checkpoints on the road to heaven. From baptism when you're born to the final rites before death, the Church controlled all of these essential ceremonies. Without a priest to perform the sacraments, people believed they could not receive God's grace, making the local priest an indispensable figure in every life. The Church was organized much like a kingdom, with a strict chain of command, or hierarchy. At the absolute top was the Pope, considered the successor to St. Peter and the spiritual representative of Jesus on earth. He commanded a vast organization that filtered down through cardinals and bishops, who managed large regions, all the way to the local parish priest who ran the village church. The Pope wasn't just a religious leader, he was a political heavyweight. His greatest weapons were the power of excommunication and the interdict. Excommunication meant banishing an individual, even a king, from the Church, stripping them of all hope of salvation. Even more feared was the interdict, which was a decree banning the performance of sacraments across an entire kingdom. This spiritual pressure often forced powerful kings to submit to the Pope's will. The Church was deeply involved in the feudal system. Over centuries, kings, lords, and ordinary citizens donated massive amounts of land to the Church. This made the Church the single largest landowner in all of Europe. Consequently, high-ranking clergy, like bishops and abbots, often acted as feudal lords themselves. They controlled territory, commanded vassals, and exerted political control over vast numbers of people. To fund its massive operations, from building cathedrals to supporting hospitals, the Church implemented a mandatory tax system. Every Christian was required to pay a tithe, which was 1/10 or 10% of their income or crops, directly to the Church. This, combined with fees for performing the sacraments, meant the Church amassed staggering wealth, becoming one of the primary economic forces of the Middle Ages. In an age when most people were illiterate, the Church was the guardian of knowledge. In monasteries, which were communities for monks, there were dedicated rooms called scriptoriums. Here, monks painstakingly copied religious texts, as well as ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, by hand. Had it not been for this constant, meticulous labor, much of the classical learning we have today would have been completely lost. The monastic life offered an alternative way to serve God. Monks and nuns took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, dedicating their lives to prayer and selfless work. Their communities, monasteries for men and convents for women, were not just places of worship. They were also centers of agriculture, craft-making, and intellectual pursuits, providing a stable, structured existence away from the chaos of the outside world. The church also served as the medieval equivalent of a social welfare system. There were no government programs to help the poor or sick. Instead, monasteries and convents ran hospitals, provided food for the needy, and offered shelter for travelers and pilgrims. This charity was a tangible way the church fulfilled its teachings, becoming the essential safety net for those who fell through the cracks of feudal society. To enforce its moral and religious authority, the church developed its own separate legal system known as canon law. This body of law governed things like marriage, wills, and proper religious behavior for all Christians. If you violated canon law, you could be brought before a church court. This meant the church held power not only over a person's soul, but also over many aspects of their daily legal life. The church was, without question, the greatest patron of the arts. They invested enormous sums of money and labor into building massive Gothic cathedrals, soaring monuments designed to reach toward heaven and glorify God. Inside, art was more than decoration. Because most people couldn't read, stained glass windows and religious paintings were vital tools used to teach illiterate farmers and villagers the stories of the Bible. One of the most intense dramas of the Middle Ages was the constant struggle for power between the popes and the kings. Kings claimed authority over people in their territory, but the pope claimed supreme spiritual authority over all Christians. This conflict came to a head over the question of who had the right to appoint bishops. The outcome of these clashes often decided the balance of political power in Europe. The ultimate demonstration of the Church's political and military influence was the Crusades. Starting in 1095, the Pope commanded Christian knights and soldiers from across Europe to launch a series of military expeditions. The primary goal was to recapture the Holy Land, specifically Jerusalem, from Muslim rule. The Church's ability to motivate thousands of people from different kingdoms to mobilize and fight showed the immense unifying force it possessed. The Church was a powerful cultural force, mainly through its use of Latin. Latin was the official language of the Church, used in all services, scriptures, and correspondence. Since Latin was understood by educated people across all of Europe, it became the common language of scholars, doctors, lawyers, and merchants. This greatly facilitated communication and intellectual exchange during a time when local languages were very different. For the average peasant, the most important aspect of the church was the local parish church. This small building and its priest were the center of village life, serving as the social, religious, and sometimes political hub. The priest was the one who personally administered the sacraments, guided moral behavior, and served as the direct link between the common person and the vast, powerful institution of the Church. The Church played a central role in defining the social structure, including the role of women. While figures like the Virgin Mary were revered, official church teachings often viewed women as inferior to men. However, the Church did offer one path to leadership and scholarship: the convent. Becoming a nun was often the only way a medieval woman could gain an education, achieve high status, and escape the strict limits of feudal marriage. Because the Church considered itself the sole source of truth, it fiercely policed its doctrine. Heresy was defined as holding beliefs that went against the official church teachings, and it was considered a severe crime against both God and society. To combat heresy, the Church created courts known as the Inquisition, which were tasked with seeking out, investigating, and punishing those accused of questioning the Church's authority. In the end, the Catholic Church was the single pillar supporting medieval society. It was the government when there was no government. It was the school, the hospital, and the welfare office all rolled into one. From the loftiest king to the lowliest serf, every person's life was shaped, guided, and often controlled by the Church. Its power and influence in the Middle Ages created the foundation for modern European civilization.